we have two resistors in parallel here, R1 and R2. R1 is 13 ohms, right, has a resistance of 13 ohms. R2 has a resistance of 5 ohms. We need to calculate the total resistance. Now remember, being that these are parallel resistors, the formula to calculate the resistances is 1 over RT, or 1 divided by total resistance, is equal to 1 over R1 plus 1 over R2. Okay. You might also know about the product over sum rule, where you would say that RT is the product R1, R2 divided by the sum R1 plus R2. Let us take a moment to see how it is derived before we do the actual calculation. Here we have 1 over RT is 1 over R1 plus 1 over R2. So 1 over RT is equal to, you see this, 1 over R1 plus 1 over R2. If you remember your fractions and how to deal with calculating fractions, you see that you will find the LCM below this line. The LCM of R1 and R2 will be R1, R2. R1 into R1, R2 here. If you do this, R1, R2 divided by R1, R1s will cancel and give you R2. So R1 into R1, R2 is R2. R2 multiplied by the 1 here is just R2 plus R2 into R1, R2. If you have R1, R2 and divided by R2, R2 divided into it, cancel R2, leaving R1. Then you say R1 multiplied by this one down here, and you put the answer here. R1 times 1 is R1. Now these will be saying that 1 over RT is equal to R1 plus R2. I just switch these around. R1 plus R2 divided by R1, R2. But if you find the reciprocal of both sides, you put the R2, the RT up here and the one down here. What you're going to have is RT over 1 equal. And you switch these around. Put the R1, R2 up top and the R1 plus R2 down the bottom. You're going to get R1, R2 over R1 plus R2. This RT divided by R1, divided by 1. You could just leave it as RT. And then of course, you have the product over sum, which is this. R1, R2 over R1 plus R2. Alright, now, that's just to remind us of the product over sum rule, where it comes from, if you're going to be using it. Now, let us look at the calculation. 1 over RT is equal to 1 over R1, which is 1 over 13, plus 1 over R2, which is 1 over 5. Alright? You could draw the line, find the LCM, and so on and so forth. But let us just use our calculator to do this. So 1 over RT is equal to, let's get our calculator. Alright, 1 over 13 is 0.077. Let's write to 3 decimal places. 0.077 plus, then 1 over 5. What is that equal to? 1 over 5 equal, 0.2, and 0.077 plus 0.2 is 0.277. That's 1 over RT. 1 over RT is the same as 0.277 over 1. So when we find the reciprocal of both, RT over 1, which is just RT, would be 1 divided by 0.277. So what is that equal to? Let's find out. So 1 over 0.277 is equal to 3.61 ohms. So we have 3.61 ohms. Okay. Now, that's RT. Now here, let us look at using the product over sum. RT is R1, R2, and R1, R2 will be 13 by 5 divided by R1 plus R2 will be 13 plus 5. What is that equal to? 13 by 5. 5 3 is 15, bring down the 5, carry 1, 5 1, 5 and 1, 6. That's 65 over 13 plus 5 is 18. Equal, and we find out what 65 divided by 18 is equal to. 65 over 18 is equal to 3.61. So we have 3.61 ohms. Alright? So we get 3.61 ohms again. Now, here, you will notice that the 3.61 is smaller than the smaller resistance here. In fact, when you have resistances in parallel, the total resistance will be smaller than the smallest individual resistance. Because what happens? If you have 5 ohms, it means current can flow down here through the 5 ohms. Suppose you did not have this at first, and you have only the 5 ohms, then current, you can have a current flow here. But when you put this 13 ohm here, it makes it easier for the current to flow, because not only can they flow here, current can flow down here too. So you have less resistance. There's an easing in the traffic. The resistance drops, because if you consider it as roads and the electricity as vehicles, some vehicles could only travel this road. But once you open up this road, other vehicles start to turn and go through this road. So it eases the traffic that's up here. It's not backed up as much as before. So the resistance drops. So the total resistance now will drop lower than the 5 ohms. Alright? So here now, that's what we have. So we have the total resistance of 3.61 ohms.